Let's go ahead and jump right in. Today, we're going to be using a ballpoint pen and some Copic markers. But first, I'm going to start with a pencil sketch. And the reason for this is to just get some primary shapes down on the page and some perspective lines that will help me when we move over to the pen. These guidelines are going to end up producing a cleaner final sketch, but you don't always have to start with the pencil. It's a challenge, but it can produce a little bit of a rougher final sketch, but sometimes I really like that style. In fact, I'll go ahead and add a link to an example of a sketch that I've done that starts with the pen and doesn't use any pencil guidelines. Let me talk a minute about the composition of this image. What I'm looking for is something with a little bit of angle and depth. So these buildings have some awnings that protrude from the building face. And then you'll see also on the side of the building, there was going to be an air conditioning unit that I throw in order to break that plane on the side. But that telephone pole, I think, is important because it adds another layer of depth and interest to my scene. And that's probably something that most people don't talk about when doing urban sketches, is finding the right composition for a sketch so that it looks good on paper. And that telephone pole kind of also balances out the other side of my sketch. Now, I kind of want to talk about what I'm doing with my grip. If you notice my pencil, how far back I'm holding it, that's intentional, and you might see this done with a lot of different artists, but the point of this is to promote a looser grip on the pencil. And really, at this stage, I don't need to be so precise with my line work. So the looser I have my grip, the freer I can be with my line work. And we can tighten up our line work with our pen when we switch over. And so now that you're seeing me jump into the pen, you'll notice that my grip is a little closer to the tip of the pen, and that is so I can have a little more control over my line work. Now, my usual process is to find the primary lines and edges of my scene and start with those and then work my way down to the detail. Normally, I don't jump right into the detail. As you can see, I'm drawing this air conditioning unit over here, but that was simply because the air conditioning unit was blocking some of my lines, and I kind of got sidetracked and started to draw out that air conditioning unit out of the artist. I kind of rushed through it. I don't really like the way it looks, but it doesn't really matter. And that's the point of these sketches. Nothing has to be perfect, but it's also not an important element in my scene. So I'm not too worried that it doesn't look great. In fact, that's one important concept about sketching, is that oftentimes it's not going to look great right away. Or you might have a couple of errors in your scene, but as you complete the image, you'll notice that the whole of the image will look much more powerful, much cleaner than the individual detail that you're putting in, which is why I tend to like urban sketching so much, is that you can make a lot of mistakes. It's really open to you to make a lot of errors. But as long as you keep providing the detail and the general spots, you'll be surprised at how an image can come together. Now, I want to point out that as I'm drawing these windows here, you'll notice that I'm drawing the lines separately. I'm drawing the bottom lines first of both windows, then the side lines, and then the top lines. And there's a couple of reasons why I'm approaching windows like this. One is if I'm drawing the same line, the bottom line of each window at the same time, I can help ensure that they're going to be on the same perspective a lot better. But also, by breaking up the lines, I can help promote the straighter line on each edge of the window. That is different than, say, trying to draw the shape of the window, a box, all in one line without lifting my pen. I think a lot of beginners make that mistake, but don't be afraid to lift your pen and draw intentional lines individually. And I also want to point out too, is as you see me draw the rest of the detail in this scene, one of the things that you'll probably notice I've been doing is that I will put down a pen mark on one side of my line, and then I'll lift my pen and add a pen dot or mark on the other side, and then I play connect the dots with that line. And that is just another technique that I use to help promote a straight line. It's giving me basically a practice line. I have 2 points in which I can visualize the line between the 2 points, and then that allows me to draw, at least in my mind, a straighter, cleaner line. And you'll see me do that often. And another thing you might see me do too is just draw a phantom line, an invisible line. I'll make the motion of a line just to get my hand used to that motion before I actually plot down an actual line. Speaking of straight lines, it's not necessarily important I have a perfectly straight line. You can see in my sketch that I have a lot of lines that aren't perfectly straight, and that just adds a bit of character to your sketch. So don't be concerned if you don't get that line perfect. Just keep going and have faith that it's going to turn out. I'm going to continue adding some detail to this building and move on to the final building over here. And again, this is just following my sketch guidelines to add the appropriate lines using my pen. Now I want to point out, if you watch how I am drawing some of the lines, you'll notice that I have been rotating the position of my hand to approach the line at different angles. And what this allows me to do is to get a straighter line. And I do this throughout. You'll notice that, for example, on this line right here, I'm kind of approaching it from the bottom, but as I move up to the side, I've moved my hand position to the side as well. What this does is allow my wrist to freely move in the direction of that line. One thing that I would be doing if I wasn't reporting myself is I'd be rotating my paper. And by rotating my paper, I can ensure that my wrist and the line that I want to draw are in a position to draw a straighter line. Now I'm going to move over to this telephone pole, and you'll notice a mistake that I make. I'll put a line down at the bottom of the base, and that is where I want to connect my telephone pole to. So I'll go up, and when I come over down to connect that line, I actually miss the vase. But it's okay that I made that mistake. I'm just going to hide it by making this look kind of like some grass around the pole, and it's not that big of a deal. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the illusion of some shading and texture just by adding some dashed lines down the length of the telephone pole. And with a little bit of a firmer grip and a little bit more pressure, I'm going to draw in some thick lines that represent the power lines of the telephone pole, and I'm going to go ahead and connect it to the building right here. Now, you'll notice another error that I have in a minute, and I'll point it out. But right now what I'm doing is I'm adding some texture, and I'm trying to add some lines that go up the face of this building. And you'll notice that I am jumping ahead to draw some lines, and that actually helps promote those parallel lines so that they all follow the same perspective. Here's where I'm erasing the pencil sketch, and you'll notice that where the telephone line connects to the building, the ink didn't dry all the way, and I smudged the ink. Now I'm going to move on to my alcohol markers, and I'm going to be using 2 shades of gray. And what I'm doing is I've been looking at my reference photo and looking at where the tone is and visually breaking up the tones into 3 colors: light, medium, and gray. The light colors are going to be pure white on my scene. The medium gray are going to be the colors that I'm adding now. And then when I get to the dark gray tones, you'll see me have those. I also want to point out that these markers come with 2 tips, a brush tip, which is what I'm using now, and a chisel tip. Normally, for larger, flatter surfaces, I would be using the chisel tip to have my shading. However, I was comfortable with the brush tip, so you'll see me use the brush tip throughout this entire piece. You can see now that I moved on to the dark tones. The thing I like about the dark gray is that it really adds that contrast and makes everything pop a little more. Normally I would start with the lightest shade and work my way to the darker shade, but I wasn't satisfied with the way this looked, so I did pull out another shade of gray, and I'm just adding some last bit of shading to my scene, and there we go. There is my final scene. Please let me know in the comments if you like seeing this type of content, or if there's other type of content you'd like to see from me.